Thank you, first of all, for having me, and thank you all so much for coming. It's such a privilege to be here. And look, I think I've been awake now for 36 hours, so I might need an English translation behind me as well, so let me see how I go. I also just want to pay tribute to the panel that came before us. That was unbelievable. You are the most incredible people. And it was such an honour to sit and to listen, and it was hosted so beautifully as well, so thank you, thank you. The moment for me, I mean, I hosted a TV show that was an opinion show, and I covered foreign affairs and politics and national security, defence. So it was something I was always going to cover extensively. Did I think for a second that me coming out a couple of days later, given what occurred on October 7, that I would come out staunchly in condemnation of the terrorists who committed the atrocities, and even more staunchly in support of the victims of the atrocity, and that would be controversial and I would be in the minority? I would have said, you're dreaming. But what I did was come out and say exactly what I thought. And you know, I don't think I even had a Jewish friend back then. I've got lots now, which is lovely. But I'd never been to Israel. I had no personal connection, but I think for me, the images that I saw and the things that I read and witnessed, and this was before seeing all the raw vision and unedited vision as well, was absolutely sickening on a level that I hadn't experienced before. And so I came out and I completely condemned it, and I stood staunchly by Israel's side, and I got completely annihilated in a way that I didn't think would be possible in a Western democracy, a country like Australia. But the next week, I did a weekly show, I got back up there, I looked down the camera and I went twice as hard. Because you can't scare me away from the truth.
Were you shocked by the fact that people were so critical of you?
I was, absolutely. I think I must have been completely naive to whatever it is that existed under the surface, and this vile hatred. I'd never experienced anything like it. You know, I was the first woman to host a rugby league and football in Australia, and that, you know, I got trolled online pretty badly, and, you know, I thought that was quite intense until this kind of stuff, and you know, the level of stuff that was coming and the nature of it, the ferocity of it. I had to give my child to her father for a period, his policeman, because the threats were deemed to be legitimate, and
threats of violence?
Absolutely.
Like what?
Oh, against her school, bombs, where we live. And I say that not in a way that I would want to garner pity. I mean, you live in a country where they are a daily occurrence, but was I surprised in my own country that this was occurring? Absolutely. The Sydney Opera House, before an IDF boot had hit the ground, we had people celebrating the massacre, celebrating, cheering, screaming, "Gas the Jews, F the Jews." I'm an immensely proud person when it comes to my country. My dad was a Major General in Australia and then a Senator, and he was in fact the most voted for individual politician in Australian history. He still is. He was an incredible human being, an incredible ally of Israel. And so I'm an incredibly proud person, patriotic person, but that was the first time I think I felt real shame when it came to my country and the way that we had reacted to what had occurred.
So do you think the fact that your father, Jim, was a military...
Okay, super. Erin, thanks so much for being with us. There are so many issues for people to advocate about. Why this one? Why Israel?
I think I was smart enough after October 7 to realise that whilst Israel had suffered all the casualties and was the victim of this horrific terrorist attack, that there was so much more at stake, and there were so many more people under threat from what had occurred, and not so much from the terrorist attack itself. I think if that had just occurred and then the world had reacted as they should have in terms of wrapping their collective arms around a country who had just suffered that attack, the victims of these heinous crimes, then I wouldn't have felt the need so robustly because I wouldn't have been required or needed. But less than a day afterwards, in my own country, in front of one of our most famous buildings, the Opera House, I saw Australians celebrating a massacre, calling for Jews to be slaughtered, essentially, celebrating one of the most horrific things I've ever seen. And I thought, we've got a real problem here. And then I looked around the rest of the world, I looked at my government, and I went, wait a minute, there is so much more at stake here than just what had occurred. That in itself was horrific, but I realized that I needed to be a strong voice.
Are you worried about what's going on in Australia with the rise in anti-Semitism? You said a few months ago that the vast majority of Australians are with Israel. Do you still think that's true?
Look, I really do. I mean, one thing that reassures me of that is that the Greens, so the political party who, you know, purport to stand for the environment, but who base their entire campaign essentially around Gaza and hating Israel, were almost completely obliterated at the election, almost completely. So that to me, in terms of there hasn't really been a shift in any other area when it comes to their policies. So that to me is comforting. I genuinely think Australians are good, decent people. I think one thing, I wouldn't necessarily, maybe they're not completely strongly with Israel, but they're definitely not against. I think Australians feel very far away. A lot of Australians, I always think about a single mum, she's got 3 kids, she's living in Western Sydney. You know, she doesn't have the capacity to engage and invest in this conflict because it feels very far away to her, and she's trying to afford groceries, she's trying to work 3 jobs. So one of the issues I think you have in Australia is people aren't engaged enough to really understand what is going on. It's not because they're malicious or they're evil or they don't have good intentions. You've then got, of course, a pocket of people who are vile, evil, anti-Semitic, terrorist-loving, you know, excuses of humans.
You started to get at this, but should Israel be worried about the results of the elections?
I mean, they weren't great, let's be honest. In terms of even just the rhetoric that government has used, even just its position and stance post-October 7 has been deeply disappointing. I look at what our country has gone through over the past, since October 7, what the Jewish community has gone through. And I think if our government, our Prime Minister had come out and absolutely said, the next day, we do not tolerate this, we do not stand for this, these people do not represent who we are as Australians, we would have seen a very different Australia eventuate. But what we saw was people looking at that who had a bit of malice, a bit of anti-Semitism, who like to cause trouble. It's the same people who protest, you know, the death of animals, or protest, like, it's all the same rent-a-crowd. They went, oh, wait a minute, no one was punished for hate speech or inciting violence. No one paid any kind of penalty. Great, so they all felt emboldened, they felt empowered.
3 more questions. Israel, the first one ever was in December. Yes. What's the most surprising thing about this country that's been most different from what you expected when you were getting on the plane for that first visit?
Look, I'd heard so much about an apartheid state, and of course I did not believe a word of it because I'd experienced enough from a distance. But coming here and going to the Western Wall and seeing 2 IDF soldiers, one wearing a kippah and one walking past the mosque, taking off his boots, walking into the mosque, obviously praying, coming back out, putting his arms on the shoulder of the IDF soldier wearing a kippah while he passed him his boots, and then they walked off together chatting. I thought, that is Israel, where people live side by side of different religions. It's the spirit of the people. I went and visited the sites of October 7, and there was an architect there, and I said to him, oh, is this your home? Oh, no, is this your mum's? Oh, no, do you know anyone here at this kibbutz? Oh, no, I just wanted to help. And then this other guy yells out and says, he earns $1 million a year in America, but he's given it all up to come here for 6 months and just contribute. Another woman at a rose garden outside another house in the kibbutz where someone was killed. I said, is this your family home? She said, no, I just, when someone comes home, I want the roses to look pretty. I don't know anyone here. I just come and water them once a week. And I just, you know, what happened was so utterly devastating and so hard to comprehend for someone from Australia who's not exposed to this terror that you are all the time. But to see how people come together, how much hope they have, and just how resilient. You should be cowering in a corner in the fetal position given what your people go through, but you're the complete opposite. It was mind-blowing.
You've said in past interviews your daughter has been at least verbally attacked there are reports you lost your job because of your advocacy for Israel. Are there ever days when you're sorry about what you've done or feeling that you may have gone too far?
Not for a second. After I did my first monologue after October 7, and it was just barrage of death threats, of violence, of my daughter had to go to her dad, I had to have police protection, it was horrific. I went back on my show the next Friday and I went harder. I looked down that barrel and I went harder. I'm my father's daughter. He was a major general in the army. He's the toughest person I ever knew. We lost him a couple of years ago. But the way I look at it, my job is to protect my child and pick your hard. So my hard now is there will be elements of danger because I'm speaking out. But if I don't speak out, what does the world look like that she has to grow up in 5 years, 10 years, 2 years? My fight is for her and her future and other kids' futures. So it's hard, absolutely, but not one moment of regret. In fact, one of the proudest things I've done is stand with Israel and stand with the Jewish people, and I mean that.
Last question. What is Israel doing right, and what is Israel doing wrong in its Hasbara, its public diplomacy?
See, this always frustrates me in that I look at it and I go, how the hell, given what occurred on October 7, given the footage that not all of it is available, but a lot of it is, that the terrorists filmed and put out themselves, how does Israel need a PR policy after that event? I mean,
But we do.
You do, and this is what is
how are we
insane.
doing?
Look, not particularly well, I'd
Why?
say.
What's the problem?
I don't know if the problem was with the PR policy and plan, or if the problem was with a world that refuses to open its eyes to truth and reality. I think it's not so much
But
that
the
Israel
world is the
blames
world.
us.
What we have control over is ourselves.
Yes,
What is
but-
it that we could be doing differently?
But what you can't control is the billions and billions of dollars that is being spent on propaganda that tries to demonize you, that has been in place for decades, that worked up to October 7, that is indoctrinating people. I sat next to a guy on a plane the other day, a smart former CEO of a bank, and he said to me, I just don't like that Israel's trying to get revenge in Gaza. You know, that's the thing I'm uncomfortable with. And I said, you realize that Hamas have continually promised to carry it out again, still have weapons, still sending bombs over, and have hostages. There's not a revenge element. He's going, oh, I guess that's so really smart people, impressive people are falling victim to propaganda that is so sophisticated. In terms of what Israel, I mean, I don't know, if I knew I'd be, look, all I can do is what I'm doing, which is trying to tell the world in real, easy to understand, simple terms, who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, because I don't think it's that complex.
Erin Molan, thank you so much.
שאלת השאלה הראשונה עוד פעם.
About why Israel? Why this one?
It's a great question, because I think it's an existential threat, not just for Israel, but for the entire world, the world that I want my daughter to grow up in, and the world that I believe in, and the values and the morals that I believe are good and righteous. I think not so much what occurred on October 7, but the reaction to it terrified me beyond anything I've ever experienced before. So I think it's an existential threat for the West in its entirety, and if we don't call it out, then we're stuffed.
Erin,
רק
thank you
לשתוק.
so much.
is a product of a long sense of siege that the Jewish people carry with them everywhere. And so exactly like Tal said, you're suddenly a voice from out there who recognized common sense was a breath of fresh air.
Positive that I take out of it, the Greens, who are vile beyond reproach, pretend to care about the environment, but every slogan, every poster they had was, you know, Gaza, Free Palestine. They based their entire campaign on it, essentially, nothing else. No climate change, they've forgotten entirely about that. And hating Israel. That was essentially, and they have almost been annihilated, and the leader might lose his seat. So that, to me, in some way, comforts me a little bit, but the return of the Labour government does not.
Is it dangerous for Jews in Sydney? Because, you know, in Paris, or in Malmö, or in Berlin, in many other European cities, Jews are advised not to wear a kippah and not to carry the Star of David. Is it unsafe for Australians, Jews?
I think the past few months would say that it is. You know, there's been too many instances of attacks, of graffiti, of cars being firebombed, of synagogues being burned. It's crazy. And it's, you know, it's intimidation and it's vile. And I look at the response to it all, and you look at those nurses, you would have all seen the videos of those nurses. And look, at least in some way there's been charges and there's a process there, but I go all the way back to the Opera House, the incident that I'm sure you'll all remember, and that incident was, you know, beamed around the world. Had our Prime Minister come out that night, or the next day, or even the day after that, and so staunchly and vehemently condemned it and said, this is not who we are as a country, this is not what Australia represents, we will not allow this on our soil. And then if we had actually enforced laws and legislation that exists, not against free speech, but hate speech and inciting of violence, which it was, both things, it was hate speech and incitement of violence. If one person had been punished, two, even a slap on the wrist, the deterrence factor was at least there. The other people who had it in them would have looked at that and gone, oh, okay. But they looked at that, and a week later they went, not one person yelling, gas the Jews, or, you know, incitement to violence has been punished. Next week, not one person. Next week, not one person. Oh, it's a free-for-all. You know, our leadership has failed immensely to set a tone and a standard. And because of that, Australians who are vile, evil, anti-Semitic people have felt empowered and encouraged to continue with this. And the Jewish community in Australia have been the greatest losers in all of this. And yeah, it's really hard for them.